It's a pleasure to welcome you to our Martin Luther King Jr. Assembly today. As I share some thoughts with you today, I'd like to begin by thanking all of the different students and faculty members who worked to make this morning's assembly possible. Each year, we gather a group of folks from across campus to plan and develop this assembly. This year, more than 20 altogether. Please join me in thanking and congratulating them, particularly our student speakers. You know, this is one of the few times that we gather as an entire Boys Latin community throughout the course of the year. And when I was thinking about today's assembly, I realized that last year's gathering on this occasion marked the last time that our full community would come together in person before the pandemic so disrupted our daily lives. So I asked you join for just a moment and let that sink in. It's been a full year since our community has been in the physical presence of one another. And a lot's happened in that time. I have to tell you, fellas, I can't wait for us to be together again, shoulder to shoulder in the Heart. So I think that there's a double significance in today's gathering, and I hope it's not lost on you. I believe that Dr. King is the most important American who has never held or run for political office. He led from principles and beliefs. He led from his convictions, and he led all of our nation, shaping a conversation difficult at times, confrontational at others, that advanced the cause of all people. And he led with our one purpose and one purpose only. Dr. King led with a commitment to create positive change. Dr. King understood and embraced the foundational elements of our nation. He would so often reflect in his talks and remarks on a specific phrase from our nation's Constitution, a phrase that ought to be familiar to you: to form a more perfect union. Dr. King knew, understood, and believed that humanity is good, that we are all perfectible creatures, and yet in that perfectibility, we have plenty of work that needs to be done. Dr. King was both an idealist and a realist. He believed boldly in a different future than one in which he lived and worked. He wisely understood that we are all imperfect in our own ways, yet he compelled us to strive to be more perfect, to overcome injustice, and to form that more perfect union. Dr. King understood that in our mutuality, our connectedness one to the other, in a single fabric of shared experiences tied inexorably in the story of human experience. What affects you affects me, and what affects me affects you. I think it's in that push and pull, that back and forth, that we see and experience the results of leadership for positive change. We may not always feel it in the moment, and certainly the last year of divide and separation has only amplified those disconnected feelings. Yet, we remember that the arc of our history bends towards justice. The arc of our history bends towards a more perfect union, towards one nation, one people, out of many, united as one. That's the purpose of leadership for positive change. That's the work that Dr. King inspired and challenges all of us to live out each day as beacons of hope and light for all of the world. Thank you.
Good morning. Today, we celebrate the life and accomplishments of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was a world-renowned symbol of the movement for African American equality. From the 1500s through the 1800s, Africans were taken and trafficked by various European and American powers and used as unpaid labor to enrich empires and nations. In the United States, the economy based on forced African American labor ended with the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. And the change in the U.S. Constitution forced the U.S. economy to change as well. And while this change was an improvement, it did not bring equality. African Americans resisted in ways, large and small, for generations and generations. And that effort continues even today. Dr. King's contributions to the cause of African American equality should never be overlooked. It is something to which he dedicated his entire life. Dr. King was a student and teacher of an intellectual tradition whose roots go back millennia. These roots draw deeply from the wisdom of multiple cultures, both East and West, from Jewish rabbi Hillel the Elder to Jesus, to Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, to Indian freedom and peacemaker Mohandas K. Gandhi. Dr. King was inspired by these great minds and souls. A moral voice in his own right, for his own place and time, Dr. King influenced American thinking by demonstrating that one can be loving yet direct, urgent without rage, and boldly honest in one's demands while recognizing the humanity of the person you are confronting. A commitment to peace in the long run, and if carried to its fullness, can never remain silent about injustice. A recognition of everyone's humanity isn't the same as excusing or justifying trespasses. Committing to peace is not the same as being permissive about oppression. What Dr. King showed us is that the truly strong man, sure in his convictions with true strength in the power and goodness of providence, does not need rage to speak truth to power. Rage is not strength. Violence is not justice. Bluster is not courage. So today, we celebrate Dr. King, whose prophetic leadership reminds us that hope is greater than conspiracies, inspiration is more effective than oppression, justice is more real than dehumanization. And as quoted by one of his mentors, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most important leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement in effort to give fair treatment to all people born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. King experienced unfair treatment every day.
After attending college in Boston, King moved to Montgomery, Alabama. Soon after, he would help to organize the Montgomery bus boycott in response to the arrest of Rosa Parks for not giving up her seat for a white passenger.
Dr. King believed that nonviolent demonstrations would bring true change and equality. He worked tirelessly for years, giving speeches, organizing marches and protests, and demanding justice for all people. Sadly, he was assassinated in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee.
We're in second grade!
Martin Luther King fought against injustice and spoke up when he saw people treated in ways that were unfair and unkind. Many feared the changes Dr. King was working toward to prevent injustice. It must have been scary and frightening to speak up, especially when many people disagreed.
He reminds us to be courageous and when things are challenging to keep trying and do the right thing. When we see something unfair or someone being treated poorly, he reminds us to speak up even when it's scary.
Dr. King believed in treating everyone fairly and with respect. He stood for justice through peaceful protests, no matter how poorly others treated him. He reminded us to have integrity and to act with kindness and love towards others to achieve justice for all.
Whether he was in Montgomery or Selma or Washington, D.C., or Chicago or Memphis, Tennessee, Dr. King worked for others. He worked for us. With each action, Dr. King chose to be a man of honor, of courage, of integrity. Because of him, we live in a better world. Now it is our turn to follow his example and make the world better for each other.
Martin Luther King Jr. fought for positive social change during the 1950s and 1960s. We'd now like to share more about the lives of 4 great African Americans who continued this work and who have recently passed away.
Elijah Cummings, the son of sharecroppers, grew up in South Baltimore in the 1950s and 60s. As congressman for Maryland's 7th District, he fought for residents of Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Howard County. He loved Baltimore, calling it a place not city limits or boundaries, but a place and space in my heart and soul that I didn't just grow up in, but that I love. When he was 11 years old, he and his friends marched to integrate the whites-only public pool at Riverside Park. In his own words,
"The experience transformed forward my entire life. There we were, about 3 years after Dr. King's pilgrimage for freedom, the protest march when he demanded that his democratic nation give all Americans the right to vote. Before those marches at Riverside, I had never experienced having a right that other people had to respect. Yet, after we gained the right to swim in that public pool, I did not have the right that was important to me, a right that others had to respect. And that realization made all the difference in the way that I viewed myself and our world."
Mr. Cummings is remembered for his defense of voting rights, his willingness to work across the political divide, and his leadership in the wake of Freddie Gray's death in police custody in 2015.
Mr. Cummings believed in young people. At the 2019 graduation ceremony at Morgan State University, Maryland's largest historically Black university, he remarked,
"Your lives are in front of you, and so I beg you to go out and stand up for this democracy. As Dr. King often reminded us in my youth, our nation's darkest hours are often just before the dawn, so it can be again if we stand together, march together, and vote together."
Elijah Cummings passed away in October of 2019. He was the first African American lawmaker to lie in the state capitol, an honor bestowed to only a few dozen statesmen throughout U.S. history. He modeled Boys Latin's commitment to integrity, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles.
In the 60s, John Lewis followed Dr. King's leadership marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where he was beaten by the police, leaving him with lifelong scars on his head. It was not the last time either. Lewis was assaulted repeatedly during demonstrations and was arrested dozens of times as he protested segregation. He helped organize the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms, where Dr. King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He later served as a congressional representative for Georgia. John Lewis is famously quoted as saying,
"Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Do not become hostile. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. We will find a way to make a way out of no way."
John Lewis passed away in July, and like Elijah Cummings, laid in state in the U.S. Capitol. There, Senator Mitch McConnell said the following:
John's friend, Dr. King, famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But that is never automatic. History only bent toward what's right because people like John paid the price to help bend it. He paid that price at every national lunch counter where his leadership made segregation impossible to ignore. He paid in every jail cell where he waited out hatred and oppression. He paid that price in harassment and beatings. But even though the world around him gave him every cause for bitterness, he stubbornly treated everyone with respect and love. Also, that his friend Dr. King once put it, we could build a community at peace with itself. May all of us pray for a fraction of John's strength to keep bending that arc on toward justice."
Mr. Lewis modeled the Boys Latin value of courage, the choice of willingness to confront danger, pain, uncertainty, or intimidation.
Toni Morrison was an American novelist, essayist, book editor, and college professor. Miss Morrison was a winner of the Pulitzer Prize, Nobel Prize, and Presidential Medal of Freedom. Toni Morrison would appear in any list of America's greatest writers. Among her famous novels are beloved Selah and Song of Solomon. She began writing about African American women in the 70s, a time during which the literary world had little interest in Black experience. She proudly, intentionally wrote for Black readers, that the whole world would take up her writing and learn from it. In a moment of personal despair, Miss Morrison wrote the following, which finds new relevance in these times of healing.
This is precisely the time where artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal.
Chadwick Boseman starred in many films portraying Jackie Robinson in 42, singer James Brown in Get On Up, and the first Black jurist of the Supreme Court, Maryland's Thurgood Marshall in the film of the same name. Most famously, he starred in Black Panther. the first big budget Hollywood film, with a black superhero and almost completely black supporting cast. Toni Morrison passed away in August of 2019, and Chadwick Boseman in August of 2020, in their sensitive artistry and rendering of African American culture. Morrison and Boseman exemplified Boyzland's value of compassion, empathic concern for others.
Elijah Cummings, John Lewis, Toni Morrison, and Chadwick Boseman were among the many folks who labored for Black representation and rights in America. Who will continue this work? All of us will, regardless of our race, because as Dr. King said, no one is free until we are all free. We now turn to our upper school brothers to show how we might lead for positive change.
Thanks, DDA. I lead for positive change by giving back to my community any way I can. I've always strived to give back to both the Boyzland and Baltimore community. I'm inspired by Malcolm X's work to advance both Black and Muslim people. He gave back to a community that was close to him and died fighting for positive change. Many others inspired me, but he influenced me the most because of how personal his work was. I've been lucky enough to spend time mentoring homeless children in this city, and it's given me a chance to create positive change on a small scale, just by helping a few kids. Even the smallest positive change can have a greater impact in one's well-being. What do you think, Jamar?
Thanks, Neil. I lead by contributing any of my ideas or skills for a cause. I'm so thankful for the figures in my life who encourage me to contribute in any way that I can. Here at BL, people like Ms. Tubman, Madame, and our alumni set the standard for which I choose to lead. I'm so thankful for my mentors outside of school, like Mr. Jackson, who taught me everything I know about health disparities, and Mr. Weinfeld, who created a program for underrepresented kids interested in the medical field. Whether it's in school, participating in MLK assemblies, or providing ideas for BAC meetings, or outside of school, educating the Baltimore City residents about health disparities in the Black community, I lead by using my artistic and social skills in any way that I can. What do you think, Jonathan?
I distinctly remember entering high school, I wanted to become more involved in different extracurricular activities around campus. And if it wasn't for Ms. Tubman, Madame Howell, or Ms. Burke, I don't think that I would be as involved as I am today. So those are the people that definitely have encouraged me and mentored me from young Jonathan entering freshman year to the one that stands here before you today. I lead by encouraging others to use their stories as ways for other people to empathize with them and really get a feel for, different things that they're going through, because I think everyone has a story and everyone's story is really special to them. And by sharing our personal stories, we can help encourage others to make change and make impact on our school community.
Reflect upon the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We see an unflinching passion, a passion for human life that he held as the world was against him. Martin Luther King Jr. stood up for what he believed in with incredible strength, fueled by his need to protect those around him, those who suffered with him, those being taken advantage of by corrupt institutions of oppression. King fought hard for his fellow humans, for their workers' rights, voting rights, and against the capitalist systems that suppressed them. King posed a threat to the status quo and knew the danger in his journey. Regardless, he was prepared to fight with his life. He knew he had to set an example, not just for his children, but for everyone. He stayed peaceful no matter how much he wanted to lose his temper, and he bore the cross. King's defiance made him many enemies, from the KKK to the FBI. When King was assassinated, it created a vacuum of power within American society. The people lost a bastion of resistance. Centralized leadership provides structure, but it can fall short when our most prominent figures are taken from us. We lose direction when we are without figures to look up to. A lot of us felt lost ever since the civil rights movement of the 60s left us without leadership. We are in an age where we can support ourselves, and any movement can be started at the tips of your fingers. Leadership can happen on any level, from showing personal kindness to instilling hope in the people as a city, state, or nationwide figure. I see a lot of strong figures in the school every day. And these are smart people with the capability to inspire. With a strong will and determination, I believe that every single one of you can become leaders. Thank you.